Hi, Ron Newman back. This time to talk a bit about the blues form. You've just read about it and you understand that it has three phrases with really at the beginning only three different chords. Remember, a chord is just a combination of notes. A triad has three notes. Then we can add notes to that, and we call a seventh chord a little bit more. Or jazz chords have a lot of notes in them often. And as we get farther into class, there's also going to be a little lecture talking about some of the chords there too. But now back to blues. Three phrases. And these are set up very simple, and they generally follow the pattern of what we call a one chord, which is where music tends to start and begin, move to a four chord and a five chord. I'm going to take you through one. I'm going to count along with it, just like the text talks about, and talk us through one time through the form. So we start with a one chord. Doesn't matter, if you know music theory, you know what that means, but if you don't, just listen to the sound. Two. Two. Come into bar five. Two, three. That's the four chord. Going back to the one chord. This is bar eight. Going to the five chord. Four chord. And then back to our one chord. That's one time through the blues, and that's called a chorus. If we say to a jazz musicians, we'll take two choruses, solo for two choruses. That means they play through the form twice. They improvise on it twice. The chords I'm playing, this is what we call comping. I'm comping in a very simple style here, one chord every beat. The chords, that first chord, a C dominant seventh chord, can be devised in a lot of different ways. I can play it like this. I can play it like this. I can play it like this. I can play it in a monk style. Thelonious Monk, like this crush sounds, really harsh type of sounds. And so how I arrange those notes, that's called voicings. So we've had comping and voicings, triads and chords, all these things that show up in our class. This is a brief demonstration of it. I'm going to play through the blues form again. I'm not going to count this time. Let's just see if you hear it, if you hear the chords as they change, and see if you recognize that this is a blues. Here we go. One, two, three. With that next beat, I would start the next chorus. That's the blues. It's amazing that this simple form has generated thousands of pieces of music in a variety of different styles. It has enough interest to keep the musicians interested, and yet it's simple enough that we learn it pretty quickly and we can relate to it in a lot of different styles of music. I'm going to do it a different way now, still the blues. I'm going to make it more of a jazzy sound, and I'm going to do that by adding a walking bass line. The walking bass player, usually an upright bass, ba-doom, boom, 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 ba-ba-ba-ba, boom, boom. That propelling motion became so popular in the swing style. that's the walking bass. Gist is supposed to represent somebody walking down the street. Going to comp in the right hand, keep the chords the same, add the walking bass. 1, 2, 3, 4. And with that last chord, our new chorus begins. That kind of pulse, that kind of walking bass line starts to move the music from the early jazz period into the swing period. And it's remained with what we call straight ahead jazz ever since then. I'm going to change it just a little bit now. I'm going to add 2 new elements. One is the voicings I'm going to make even more jazzy. I'm going to play them with a set of notes that is more appropriate for the late swing period, maybe even the bebop period. So I'm going to do that. I'm also going to add in a few notes, a few chords. I mean, these chords, not a big change, but an extra chord here, an extra chord here that became popular even in the early jazz period, right? Even after the basic early blues sound. And so this becomes what I think is the most common jazz form. You don't need to know what these chords are, but I'm going to play them for you. So this is going to have a more jazz sound. This could sound, depending on things, late 1920s, Louis Armstrong, 1930s, throughout that time. This is kind of what it would sound like. 1, 2, 3, 4. Jazz sound in that. The last thing I'm going to demonstrate for you happens to be a very sophisticated blues. This came about in the 1940s, and as you'll discover, the jazz musicians of the 40s, the bebop musicians, they tried to make music even a little bit more complicated. They were used to playing these other forms, the ways of doing the blues, and of course, these are very, very creative people. You know, what can they bring to the music? Well, one of the things they brought to it was a more complicated set of chords over the same blues progression. This particular one comes from a tune, a very famous tune, Charlie Parker tune called Blues for Alice. And so I'm going to play through this particular form for you and see if you hear it. Right from the second measure, we have a brand new set of chords which take it into a completely new direction. So here's the bebop blues form from Blues for Alice. 1, 2, 3. That's definitely a bebop sounding type of blues. There's one last thing that we want to talk about with blues, and that's the word bluesy. Because the word bluesy implies a certain sound, but it doesn't necessarily imply the blues form. We've mainly been talking about the blues form, 12 bars, 3 phrases. But something can sound bluesy just by putting in the blues notes and certain effects. I can do that over any tune. the Michigan State fight song. I don't know if you caught that. It was pretty hidden in there. But those particular sounds are part of the blues tradition. You can think of the singers, especially the guitar players, the Blind Lemon Jefferson recording that you heard, and others, where they would bend the strings of the guitar and go up above the pitch and down below the pitch. These are really bluesy types of sounds. I can't do that on piano. We create that on piano by doing crush sounds. Playing two notes at the same time, letting one of them go, and sometimes that's all I have to do to turn any tune into a bluesy sound.